Today we're going to add color or glaze to our mystery creature doors. We're going to be using materials very similar to paint, but it's called glaze because it's special for clay. It looks a little different than regular paint, but it's used pretty much the same with a couple of extra steps. So the first thing you're going to do, hold your pencil grip style. Make sure you're staying away from the silver or the gold part of the ferrule, and you just need a little tiny bit of glaze on your brush. And as you're painting, you're going to see it's very thin, kind of like water, but it's okay because we are going to paint each shape a couple of different times, actually 3 times, to make that glaze really shine. So this is going to make your artwork not only colorful, but very shiny, like a marble. So that's why we have to paint it 3 different times. We're just going to focus on 1 coat at a time, or 1 layer of paint. When you're creating colors for glaze, you're painting 1 coat at a time, not the kind of coat you wear, but 1 layer of paint. That's what that means when you're using glaze. So I'm just painting over these pebble stones or rocks 1 time with this light orange color. And I could have painted all of my pebbles different colors or done a pattern, but I just felt like painting them with the same color. Now, once you add the glaze, at first it's very shiny and wet. When it's wet or shiny, that means it's not dry yet. So as you paint different areas of your mystery creature door, I want you to keep watching the shapes that you painted first and just kind of check them out and decide when you think they are dry. And as they are drying, you're going to see that the color looks even lighter, and you might even think, oh my goodness, I know I painted more than that. Why does it look lighter? Well, as it dries, it does get even lighter. So now I'm going to paint my doorknob with my orange, since I already have it in my hand and I don't have to clean my brush. And I'm thinking about any other areas that I might want to paint with this color orange, okay? Now, when I'm done with that, I'm going to let it soak in the hot tub while I use a different brush. We're using the right brush for the job. So if a shape is itty bitty, make sure you're using a smaller brush. Here's the turquoise glaze. It's even lighter than the orange. Now, you can add a little bit more paint if you think it's way too thin or way too light, but don't add a whole bunch because remember, we are going to paint over it again. Now, I'm going to turn this one because remember, we're painting a piece of art that is a sculpture. That means it has form. It's got sides to it. So especially around the sides, you want to paint the sides. So you're going to have to pick your sculpture up to paint the sides. Just be very careful. The only part we do not paint is on the back. We do not want to get any glaze on the back. If you get glaze on the back of your sculpture, when I put it back in the kiln, which I'm going to have to do to fire this glaze, it will stick to the kiln's shelf and I won't be able to get it off. So if you have glaze on the back of your sculpture today, I'm not going to be able to put it in the kiln, and it's not going to come out very shiny. It's going to stay like it is, and the colors won't be dark and vibrant. It'll just look like it is today. Now I'm going to check the back and make sure I didn't get any glaze on the back. If you do get a little bit of glaze on the back, you can use your baby wipe to clean it off as much as possible. Okay, so use your baby wipe to do that today. Now, my orange pebbles are already dry, so I can paint over them a second time, or I can just wait. I think I'm going to paint the whole thing 1 time, and then I'll paint the whole thing a second time. And then I'll paint the whole thing a 3rd time. So we're painting 3 coats of paint so that our sculpture has enough glaze on it. That's just the way it is. It's got to have several coats of paint so it will turn out so nice and shiny. The better you add your coats, like the better you are about layering your paints and painting it 3 times, the shinier and brighter your colors are going to be when it comes out of the kiln. Especially if you have a little hole, like I have a little keyhole, I'm really getting my brush in there. And I even might want to lift it up and try to paint like the top of this keyhole, okay? And just be very careful. Might even want to use my tiny brush to do that part, but I thought this one was okay. Now, when you're switching colors and you want to use the same brush, make sure you clean your brush like we always do. I want you to find the water dish and just push it to the bottom, tap, 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 and wipe it on dirty old SpongeBob until your brush is clean. So you can soak your brushes, but if you're ready to switch, then go ahead and clean your brush. All right, I'm gonna speed this up while you watch me finish my first coat of paint. A few other tips for using glaze is glaze cannot be mixed together with more than one color. So for example, I'm painting the inside of these windows with a violet color. I would not go on top and add orange or blue. I'm painting each shape the same color. That I can switch colors when I switch shapes. For example, I'm switching to a green now because I'm painting a different part of the window. Also, when you're painting with this glaze, you might notice that it is very light, especially as it dries. Now, if you'll notice the very first shapes I painted, those cobblestones, they're even lighter than before. So don't think that you need to add more paint after you've painted them one time. Trust me, just wait, be patient, let it dry, and then we're going to add a second and third coat. Now, I also want to make sure I paint the sides of my sculpture, going very carefully, lifting it up as I go, and just grabbing it in dry places so that I don't get paint on my fingers. And if that happens, you have a baby wipe, so that's okay too. So go around very carefully. Now, when you're painting any textured pieces, for example, the front, I use the lace to make these wonderful texture patterns. That's where I painted with the light red on the front. Just make sure your brush gets in there so that you cover up those pieces completely. Now it's time for a second coat. So once I finished everything, I'm going back to the very first objects I painted, either the spirals on top or the cobblestones, and I can paint my second coat. I don't have to wait for it to dry. I'm just painting shapes that are already dry. You can tell they're dry when they're not shiny looking, or if you actually touch them with your finger and you can feel if they're dry. So go ahead and just paint your shapes that are completely dry a second time, and look how much better it looks already. When you add a second coat, once it's dry, it gets a little darker and a little bit more vibrant. So if you're trying to add layers of glaze on a wet piece and you keep painting wet paint on top of wet paint on top of wet paint, it's not going to make it darker. So you're going to get frustrated if that happens. So that's why we wait till it dries and then we paint it a second time, and then we're going to paint it a third time. When you paint it your second time, you will be painting everything the same color as before. Please be very careful and pay attention. You're going to see Miss Dowmy dip her brush in the wrong color a few times, and when that happens, I clean my brush off and make sure that I dip it in the right color. If you accidentally get paint the wrong color on a shape and it's the wrong color, just keep going. Don't worry about it. You can try to wipe it off with your baby wipe while it's still wet. But since all of our clay pieces are so close together, of course, we're going to get a little bit of glaze on the wrong piece every once in a while. So if you would like, maybe paint one shape, and if you have a shape that's really close to it, you might want to come back and paint that shape later once your first shape is dry. For example, the purple window with the green design around it, I might not want to paint those together. I might want to wait for the purple to dry before I come back with that green. That's just a tip. Don't forget, second coat, you're still painting the sides very carefully, flipping it over, and make sure that you're not using a lot of glaze. You're also going to see Miss Dowmy dip the brush in the paint and then return and then kind of wipe it off on the rim or the edge of the paint cup, because I got a little bit too much paint and I don't want it to drip to the back. If it does, or if I get paint on the back, I can use my baby wipe. All right, it's time for a third coat. You can see it's getting even more colorful. The colors are getting brighter and brighter, and this is the third time I'm painting it, so this is the final time. So the third time, really make sure you're covering your shapes really well, because now you are used to the glaze, you're used to the brush, so make sure if you have any huge white spots, make sure you cover those up. And remember, when you're painting with a new coat, start with the pieces that are dry first, or start with the shapes that you painted first before you're painting the wet shapes. If anything is wet and you're ready for the third coat, you're going to have to wait until it's dry, but it does not take long. If you're painting and the colors just aren't very bright and vibrant, you can see, especially on the paint that I'm using, the violet and the blue, I just tried to get it to shine as much as possible or to be as colorful as possible, and it just wasn't becoming very dark. It's just made that way. Some of the colors are just light anyway. All right, here's two other examples, and it's your turn.